I was at Huairu. I was at the NGO conference.
In those dates, I was actually in Beijing. I attended both the Huairu NGO Forum and the Fourth World Conference on Women.
I was shuttling between Beijing City and Huairu. Huairu is where the NGO Forum for the Beijing conference took place, and Beijing was where the official conference took place. Some of us were attending both conferences, both the official conference and the NGO Forum.
I was in Beijing.
I was in Huairu, although I stayed in a hotel in Beijing.
I was too young to understand what the Beijing conference was.
Imagine coming to a country that was so unknown, to a young Costa Rican activist, and meeting not only this incredible country with such a rich history, but thousands of women from all over the world that were as excited.
I think there were about 1 million pot plants decorating the streets of Beijing. And there were all these banners about welcoming us, and it had the three sort of catchwords of all the UN Women's Conference: equality, development, and peace. But the Chinese added a fourth one, and that was friendship.
I remember feeling, my God, this is such a historic moment. This is such a historic experience, and I have the privilege of being here. How lucky am I?
It was the experience of a lifetime, particularly for those of us who were young, and we had been looking forward to it for so long.
And there were our mentors and teachers, and it was like a crash course on feminism and women's rights and women's human rights and so many issues.
It was decades of organizing from the grassroots up that brought us to that time, to 1995. It didn't just happen.
You kind of have to locate Beijing in the historical context of, first of all, that it was preceded by 3 World Women's Conferences. And especially the World Conference on Human Rights, I think, established an important baseline in saying that women's rights are human rights, which seems so ridiculous that you have to fight for that sentence. But at that time, in 1995, that was a huge victory.
India had been participating in all the international stuff between those 2 decades, but also within the country. In every state, there were committees set up of women who were involved in the women's movement, who met, brought their concerns together, produced papers, issues of journals, and in the end, who got together and basically selected, nominated, chose, volunteered the women who actually went to Beijing.
And through those 2 decades, I think the women's movement, or women's movements, feminist movements, really grew in terms of their maturity, in terms of from sort of hardcore confrontations in Mexico City, especially ideologically between Western feminists who, in particular US feminists, who sort of conveyed a kind of liberal feminism and a non-understanding of Southern feminist voices, to gradually a much better understanding of and respect for the diversity.
It was a process that actually democratized the participation in a critical global advocacy space in a way that had never been thought about before or focused on before. There was a kind of an upsurge from various parts of the country that said, no, what's going to happen is the usual, the donors will talk to their favorites, the organizations they fund, and they'll send a bunch of their people. No, we don't want it that way.
Almost every country had like a coordinating committee for Beijing. In every country in the region, very diverse women got together with the question, what are the demands that we want to take to Beijing? What we want the governments to agree on? What are the issues that we care about? And we did a project because Older feminists always said, young feminists, what do you want? You not even know what you want. And we knew very well what we wanted.
So, for example, one of the things that happened at Beijing was the presence of Dalit women, that is, women of so-called untouchable castes. And it was the start of their mobilizing as connected groups and setting up a very important group called the National Federation of Dalit Women, headed by a woman called Ruth Manorama. And Beijing was for them a key moment where they could assert their identity as both part of and separate from the mainstream of the women's movement in India. And this happened because Dalit groups across the country got together in this process of preparing for Beijing.
And of course, the power differentials were at the table too. There were some voices that had stronger weight than others. There were some realities that had more visibility than others. Because I think that Beijing shows the power of diversity, but it also showed the challenges that we have to really ensure that that diversity brings us together. Even though the Beijing Platform for Action, it's not a treaty, which means it's non-binding, no? It became a platform for promoting public policy at the national and regional level and also at the global level. It's a tool, of course, with the limitation of any tool.
Of course, it's not as comprehensive as we would like it to be, but at the very least, we could turn to the Beijing document for advocacy and also to push for better legislation in our country.
It fueled a lot of mobilizing and organizing at local level. We still need to go back to that. A lot of networks and organizations were created at that time.
The defenders of land and territory, all the movements that are resisting the extractivists and the capitalism by dispossession agendas, the movements against genocide and militarization, the movements related to climate justice and that are trying to protect Mother Earth. All of those movements have very strong feminist leadership. So feminism is not only the movement that is pushing for the specific demands related to women, but it's also the feminists that are leading many other struggles.